Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. It's 2023, and I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting.
Today, we're super excited to talk about the Clifton Strengths talent theme of consistency. This is not my number 6, so I still count it in my dominant strengths and talents. Chad, what about you?
This is my number 12, actually, and I still count it as one of my dominants, but we'll get into how that shows up as we go through this today.
Great. Do you want to tell us the short description that Gallup has about the Clifton Strengths theme of consistency?
Sure. So consistency is defined by Gallup, or the consistency theme is defined by Gallup as follows. People exceptionally talented in the consistency theme or in consistency talents are keenly aware of the need to treat everyone with equality by setting up clear rules and adhering to them.
Yeah. So, but this is different, right? Because we use words like you want to do something consistently, right? So
Right.
we had a whole conversation about the difference between like the definition of consistently, like when people are doing things consistently, and consistency as a theme. Did you want
Yeah.
to elaborate a little bit on
So
that?
I thought, yeah, I think that's a great point to start with. And this comes up a lot. I don't know about you, but it comes up a lot in the workshops that I do, or people that have this theme, and then they start to ask questions about it. Well, I think it comes from a place of our English language is, can be interesting at times, and also that Gallup has used some of these words. We had the same sort of conversation about the harmony theme a couple episodes ago. So I think when we talk about this, the consistency theme, that group of talents, if you really read the long description, it has a people focus to it. It's about treatment of people. And I think you're going to hear a lot about fairness and predictability as we go through today. I know that those are some keywords that we landed on when we were talking about this and doing our pre-show prep. Compared to the other theme that I think often gets kind of mismatched with this theme, which is discipline. And so if you look at the long definition of discipline, it has a lot more to do with creating order, structure. It's a lot more about process versus people. And so when we think about that consistently, doing things consistently, that really has more of a tie over to that discipline theme than the consistency, which is much more about the people. So I've even had people read it and say, well, why isn't this a relationship building or even maybe an influencing grouped? Why isn't it grouped with those domains versus where it is as an executing theme? And so I think that that's something that we should just be aware of going in, and listeners to this show should really be thinking about as they listen to the other insights we're going to share today.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it was one of the ones that continued to trip me up when I first started with
Yeah.
with the Clifton Strengths, because it seems like it should be about processes and procedures, and that these people would be great at setting them up, but that's not necessarily the case. What I love about it is that it can be messy. My achiever likes to be messy because we just want to get things done. So my process might not be super clean on my own, but having consistency really brings some of that out. Being able to really use my themes and follow processes well. I'm super excited about being able to work with people who have processes in place.
Yeah. So Jen, since we've laid out sort of this initial um difference, or started to
Yeah,
parse this apart, I'm curious if maybe you could start us off, given that this is
sure.
your 6th theme and it is my 12th. And so again, while it is still one of my dominants, you probably live this a little bit more in your everyday life than I do.
Yeah.
What does this look like for you? How does it show up? Um, how does it help? We're going to get to sort of the pros and
The
cons of it,
benefits. Mhm.
but kind of how has it maybe helped you a little bit? Um,
Sure.
but just generally, what are your thoughts on this theme?
Yeah, being that it's, I have lots of other executing themes, and being this is my sixth executing theme, or my fifth executing theme in my top six.
Yeah,
Yeah,
got it.
it partners really well with those other executing themes and letting me really get things done. I'd say that the biggest thing about it that I find is, how it comes out for me is this ability for me to be predictable and somewhat stable. Um, I really do expect there to be rules and procedures that everyone has to follow, that everyone is treated the same. That is really important to me. In fact, there was a longer there was a part in the longer description, and I'm not going to say it verbatim, but it goes along the lines of, there, if anyone gets an unfair advantage because of their connections or background or potential greasing of the wheels,
Yeah,
or the world, like living in the world of special favors, is truly offensive to you, and it absolutely is. I can't stand when people are treated unfairly, or left for, like pushed aside because someone else was maybe a smoother talker or something and got
yeah,
themselves in a great situation. I like things to be fair. So,
yeah,
um, really having that fair, having the rules, the procedures, the processes to follow, rule follower again, I think that
yeah.
partners really well with my belief. Um, but having those really lessens the risk of errors, or in like people being treated unfairly. If we all
Yeah.
have the same rules, it really works out better. At least it feels better to me.
Yeah.
Chad, how does this show up for you?
Yeah. So I would definitely echo that idea of moving away from favoritism. Um, I I too have the same sort of reaction, and that same line popped out for me in the long description. So it's that's one of the reasons why I do know it's still one of my
Yeah.
dominant themes, is that is consistently part of my, and there I go, consistently. That comes from the discipline side of having it
Yep.
show up on a regular basis. Um, but that gut feeling of, well, why is there this favoritism? For
Mhm.
me, it's really about preferring work environments where it's much more based on sort of a meritocracy, where
Yeah.
your work product, the way you do your work, the work quality is, and how you engage with others is really how you build that sort of that trust, that predictability, that
Mhm.
sense of excelling. You're excelling because of what you work, not how smooth you can talk. I think that was a wonderful
Yeah.
inclusion you added that I resonated with. Um, so the clear rules, I think for me, one of the things that I have noticed recently with all these conversations about DE and I is that, on a personal basis, I am a white male from a fairly middle class upbringing, and I fully recognize that comes with some unearned privileges. And for a lot of time, for a lot of my life, that does not sit well. It does not sit well when I see that maybe my face gets, I get an opportunity because of my connection within that realm, versus a very well respected, or a somebody very qualified that is from a typically disadvantaged or disenfranchised community.
Mhm.
So I think on a personal level, that's one of the places that this theme comes out for me, in sort of a personal aspect. I would say a couple other things that strike me about this is that this has always informed a lot of the volunteer work I've done.
Mm.
So, when I go into situations or engage with uh, communities or people that are not as well off as I am, I do have that gut feeling of, thinking about them as just another human being. They are a human being like I am. They deserve all the dignity and all the fairness that all of us should have.
Mhm.
And that, consistent reminder that if only if I could be in their
Right.
shoes and they could be in mine. The tables have flipped. So I think that recognizing that on a regular basis is almost it comes from this consistency set of talents.
Chad, I
Yeah,
want to stop right there and echo what you're saying, because I feel that at a deeper level too. There are so many times that all of us need to stop and be thankful for where we are, because it might be one slip, one bad decision,
right.
one change of circumstance that could put us in a place where we're, needing extra help or additional things. And so to really echo that, like, you see it and you see how, like, quickly that could turn. So
Yeah,
I think it's great that you brought that up, because that is something that, with consistency at the heart, it's always about fair. And
yeah.
it's hard to look at the world and see the unfairness of it.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'm talking about this coming from an initially, say, let's say, a place of volunteer work or trying to
Mm-hmm.
give back to my community. That's somewhat of a community or personal level, but I also think the same thing comes to play within work environments
Mm-hmm.
when upper level management might necessarily, sometimes forget what
Yeah.
how it is to be, that entry level position, or to treat people differently just based on their titles. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's another place where, um, at least for me, it can start to feel a little uncomfortable. I could, get my hackles up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just something also to keep in mind, that it can be both in the personal, the community, as well as in the
Yeah.
workplace. And so I think that's really um, powerful. So I you asked me about sort of how else this shows up for me. I think one of the other things that um, struck me as I was rereading the description and really thinking about this theme, as sort of a silo subject. I know we've talked about they always intersect with each other.
Right.
But my harmony, we did harmony a couple episodes ago, and we talked a lot about its practical edge. I think consistency also shares that practical
Mm-hmm.
application of shared rules. You've already brought that up a couple times.
Yeah.
Knowing what those rules are allows nobody to necessarily get bent out of shape because, oh, there were special rules for him or her, and then there are different rules for you and these other people. And so um, that component, I think, has really struck to me. And the
Mm-hmm.
last place, again, this is a little bit more on a personal note, but I have found that my consistency talents are energized by the world of sport, particularly soccer and
Wow.
basketball, where there are really objective boundaries. There are
Mm-hmm.
standard rules for everybody. There is a sort of yes, no, you've either scored or you haven't.
Right.
I probably wouldn't be as connected with sports, like, say, when figure skating used to be so subjective, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just out of a ranking of 10 points, and there were all sorts of factors, and you could never quite figure out, well, how exactly did that get that to that score.
Mm-hmm.
um, so anyway, just back to basketball and soccer, where the rules are the same, everybody understands them when they step onto the field or step onto the court.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another place where my consistency talent themes are both brought to light as well as fed.
Yeah, nice. What I think is great about that too is, even though there are, like, refs on the field, or someone to call that out, we
Yeah.
as watchers are always like, oh, they missed that. This is, and
Yeah.
I don't know if that resonates maybe stronger with others with consistency too, where, like, you're even closer or quicker to spot that, like, in unfairness than maybe some of the other talent themes.
Maybe I'd have to probably think about that in maybe some of my last games, but I think it's just knowing that there is a consistent set of rules for both
Yeah.
teams,
Yep.
and that there is sort of, we're going to get to some imagery here in a minute, but there's also sort of that uh, neutral
Yes.
force, a referee or
Right.
referees on the court or on the field. They're sort of helping impose, um,
Right.
making sure that the rules are followed, not
Hmm.
impose, but
Yeah.
survey and make
Right.
sure that they're following them. So, um,
Yeah.
Jen, we've talked about a little bit about how this theme shows up for each of us.
Hmm.
I'm kind of curious about sort of the impacts of this theme
Yeah.
on our lives. And I'm going to follow the thread we've had for the last couple of shows. Is we're actually going to start on the negative side because we'd love to sort of see the
And on a
bright
positive
side toward
note.
the end of it. So let's start with how this theme has maybe negatively impacted your life or your working relationships.
Sure.
Um, so that hopefully we can go over to the positive side here in a minute.
Yeah. I'd say the biggest time I see it, where it does not sit well for me, or I really struggle with it, is in times of change. I know change
Mm,
is necessary, um, but it needs to maybe have some sense to it. I don't like change just for change's sake. So, like in work, if somebody decides like they have a new uh, software system they want to try out, and we're just going
okay.
to like drop what we've been using, what works great, and now we're going to use this new thing. And then, a week later, we're going to use something else. So that constant change is really hard to maneuver and keep the expectations of high quality. So that's where like a lot of my other, and you can hear some of my responsibility, my achiever coming out in that, any like hiccup to that like normal process that I would normally follow, it causes this like sticky spot in me where I really
Yeah.
struggle to keep moving and keep my quality where I want it, because the expectation now has changed.
Okay.
It's been disrupted. um, I'd say personally, I struggle really a lot with working with others who don't maybe have a clear process and procedures to follow. So um, if I'm working with you and you are kind of all over the place and I don't know what this process is we're following, then it's going to be harder for me to get on board. Now, if you're giving me that that ownership, to take ownership and then find my own process or what works for me in that situation, I'm okay and can keep moving on. But if I'm asked to follow your process and it's not clearly defined, the expectations are not set, that's really tough for me, and I do struggle. All my executing themes like glob together there in that moment, and we're like, we don't know how to keep moving forward. The risk is there.
Yeah.
You can hear them all in
So,
there. My deliberative,
yeah.
my responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I actually want to ask you a question about that because you've just highlighted a lot of sort of process side. And, we talked
Mhm.
at the very beginning of the show about the difference between consistency
Yeah.
and those discipline talent themes. For our listeners, just a curiosity, where does your discipline follow? Or
31.
really? Okay.
Yes. So it
So
is very, very low. So in all honesty, Chad, it's probably the consistency, like knowing that there's clear rules to follow and that these are what I need to follow with my belief, all of these coming in here together.
okay.
That's really what helps me be successful.
Yeah.
Because and I know we're not talking about benefits right now, but it's that like struggle, because I don't have it in me easily to create these processes or the discipline to stick with a process if it's not well laid out. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. I was just gonna not so much challenge you, but I'm really kind of curious to dig just one layer deeper. Is that
Mhm.
you're talking about a lot of processes when change happens? That's usually, you mentioned a lot of systems change. Is there an equal side that has to do with, say, the rules and behaviors of the people? Is that what triggers your sort of hackles, or
Yeah,
or never,
possibly.
or negatively gets in your way, or
Yeah,
is it purely
possibly.
about the system side?
No, you are probably hitting it right, that it is more about, now I don't know how I'm measured. Because if
Got
the
it.
process
Okay.
isn't there, then how am I measured compared to you if you were working
Got it.
and doing the same thing and we're doing this loosey goosey process?
Yeah.
Yeah, where are we getting, like, what does success look like in that moment?
Mm,
What is the base level?
yeah.
Um, I
I,
think that's another, you just highlighted where I was going next, was that
oh, wonderful.
I I can get stuck in how the work is done, not what gets done.
Ah,
Does that help? So a lot of, and that's this like following the rules and making sure it's fair. So in a lot of different cases, in some of my past jobs and relationships with others, they had different talents than me, and I was worried about how they were getting the work done, not what they were getting done. And it was a lot of
Right.
comparison, and that's where it can go real, it can feel really negative, and
Yeah.
it comes from this place where it doesn't feel very good to feel that way, where I feel like things are unfair. So that's one. The other one I was going to say is, I, because of this, and my consistency is pretty high, I feel like I lack the ability to overly customize an
Mm,
approach for interaction um, with those that have different needs than me, or maybe the team. So again, back to that kind of how the work is done rather than what gets done. Um, I struggle, like I feel like everyone should do it the same way so that it's fair, but that
yeah.
doesn't take into account the people side of it. You know, I'm going to treat everybody the same.
Yeah, it's those are some great points, Jen. I was just thinking as you were talking that, those that share consistency talents with us probably are having some aha moments of, oh, maybe that's what's getting my way, or
Mhm.
maybe you have a colleague that has these themes, and you're like, oh, that's where they're getting agitated. I haven't redefined what the shared expectations are. I think those are
Right.
some beautiful points. It's interesting that individualization comment you made was actually where I
Mm-hmm.
was going to go next, in
Yeah.
terms of where it negatively impacts my life. You've talked a lot about work. I'm going to bring in a personal sort of example. I have two young boys. They're wonderful kids.
Mhm.
I'm not going to share their names. Just they're living their own lives. They don't need to be all part of the show. But
Yep.
um, I have individualization as a talent theme at number 9.
Mm.
And one of the things I have noticed on occasion, it creeps in, and it has it rears its unfortunate head sometimes, is that my consistency can actually overpower that individualization. And I
Oh.
start to think about getting the same thing, or saying the same expectations for my younger son,
Mm.
then I'm expecting the same thing as I would my older son. They're under teenagers, but they're old enough to know better.
Right.
And so they definitely have their own personalities, and sometimes I lose track of that, because I'm starting to try and sort of maybe impose a little bit of that consistency. Again,
Hmm.
my responsibility, trickles into that, seasons it,
Yep.
as we've talked about in previous episodes. I think I've talked about where what the expectations are for each of them in our responsibility episode.
Hmm.
But I think that's another place where it can come out. And so,
Yeah.
tying it back to the workplace, I think your point was very well made. Of, if you start to think about expecting the exact same thing from each individual and not recognizing that they are unique people,
Right.
um, it not only impacts, you're going to get the same sort of reaction I get from my sons of, wait a minute, I can't fulfill that. Or
Right.
then you've started to damage that relationship, whether it's with my sons, or if I'm doing the same thing in a work environment, I'm damaging relationships with current or future colleagues.
Right.
um, so
Yeah.
um,
I think that's a beautiful point, because you're right. We all have different needs that need to be
yeah,
met. And so thinking that everyone has the same needs is a trap that I think
right,
consistency can fall into.
yeah.
Hmm.
So we've got a little negative here, Jed, so let's bring a little bit
Yes.
back closer to the bright side here. So, flipping this theme, maybe not on its head, but to the brighter side of things, how has this been a benefit? How has this theme benefited you in some of those work environments, or maybe there's some personal stuff you want to share as you
Sure.
think about this theme?
Yeah, when we first started, I talked to you a little bit about that, like predictable and stable
Mm, yeah,
thing. So this is one of those talents that I feel like has really helped me in that. My clients always know where I'm coming from. They know how I do the work I do. So it makes me, the consistency theme really does make me predictable. Um, they also know I strive to do what's fair. So this has
yeah,
come to kind of bite me in the past, where I could have maybe gotten a little bit more of a profit on something, but because I know what it cost and what we should sell it for, some of those types of things have happened in my past where I might not have gotten all of the money I could have gotten out of it, but because I'm worried about it being fair. So that's one thing I think is really important, though, is to really drill down to that. It needs to be fair for both sides. It needs to feel fair, and I think I've been able to build a lot of trust with clients,
Yeah.
with coworkers, with friends, with family members, even when I am stable and predictable. And I think consistency is the reason why that happens most times.
Yeah.
Um, I also think it's one of those, like, I don't have the procedures and processes planned out on my own, like
Yeah.
back to those things again, but knowing the people that I work with, when they know that I'm using those and we're actually working through these things, it's really helped to build trust with those people when they know they have a clear process to follow and what they're being like judged on or based on, because they know it's fair. I'm not going to change the rules for someone else. Like we all have the same rule. Um, that fairness helps set the expectation up front,
Yeah.
to the point where I feel like if we start there, then we know, like, we're not gonna, we won't have the questions, the issues, the risk, regarding fairness, because we set those expectations up front. And my deliberative, as we say, like, seasons that so much, because that loves my deliberative loves that, because it's keeping that risk to a minimum.
Hmm. It's interesting to hear you say that, because I know when we talked in the pre-show about risk,
Mhm.
you had made what I thought was a wonderful observation about it almost allows people to work through risk or willing to even take
Yeah.
risk because the consistency of how they're treated
Hmm.
is sort of unchanging. And so
Right.
if you take a risk and it doesn't work, that's okay. We understand that that was something that we all sort of agreed to, or that we knew that you were going to go out and do that. And
Right.
that's setting the expectations part of, hey,
Hmm.
this is acceptable. It's it's okay to go out and try something new, but you've already set that through your consistency
Right.
themes, consistency talents,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
okay, which I thought was really interesting. Um,
How about for you? What are some positive ways that this shows up for you?
yeah, so it it's one of those things, I resonate with a lot of what you said around sort of rules and rule following.
Hmm.
I've been called a bit of a square before, because I do like knowing what's going to happen and how I'm going to be treated. Um, but it's also a place where it has really helped me follow, professional ethics and certain, rules and regulations, whether they're federal or state or institutionally instituted. That there's an acceptance of that. There's um, knowing how to incorporate those so that it benefits everybody. So, one of my previous roles was trying to essentially coordinate the what the institution needed, what a particular outside donor needed to, and then what we, maybe the beneficiary, the student need. This was in my St. Michael's days, um, and pulling all those together, and also considering, what are the legal ramifications, what are the IRS regulations, and knowing how to piece all those together so that it was fair for everybody. And again, that word fairness, I think we're going to hear a lot more of as we keep talking.
Oh, yes.
Um, but figuring out how to make sure everything comes together and everybody's being treated with a sense of fairness. The rules are being respected, the people are being respected. So I think that that's one place. I will just simply echo that. I think this theme for me has brought a fair amount of trustworthiness.
Hmm.
People see me as, having a sense of integrity and being able to trust my work. Um, so I think those are the two big places where this theme has really been a benefit, so that you set all those expectations. I've been able to set expectations and
Yeah.
try and keep everybody happy. Again, seasoned with a bit of harmony, like I talked about at the beginning. There's a sense of balance and a sense of practical application. How do you take all those different perspectives? How do you set the right expectations so that everybody comes out of it ahead?
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to talk
yeah,
about how this shows up? You've had some clients that have consistency, clients and others that you've coached in the past who
yeah.
have consistency high.
So obviously, to keep the integrity, I'm not going to use their names. That
Correct.
would be break some confidentiality, and that would be not consistent with what I've promised them. So
Right.
I'm gonna own that right now, given that we're talking about this theme. But I do think that there have been two really interesting applications of this that I've seen recently that just add another layer, and it I hope that our listeners take this as an opportunity to reflect on, so what is their version of what does this theme look like? But the two I'll share is one, she was actually in sort of a compliance type role. And, there are lots of, in her work, a lot of federal and state regulations that she has to consider, and a lot of guidelines that are already set out for her. But one of the things that came up in our coaching was that those policies and practices don't cover every instance. And so what I found beautiful, she actually happens to have adaptability also in her top 5. So here you have apply things as consistently as possible to benefit people and be fair, but you still have to adapt because the guidelines don't always cover every situation, every instance. There are what now, 8 billion people on the planet. You're not going to be able to come up with a policy or practice that's going to cover everybody. So what I thought was beautiful about her consistency was that she could consider what the ideal application of a policy or practice was, but then figure out the best way to apply it to a unique situation. So it goes back to that individualization component that we were talking about before, where for me, it can sometimes negatively get in my way. And if you think about it in the way that she is, it has a beautiful sort of positive side application.
That's a great blending of the two of them, because my adaptability is at 7. So I have that, that's my first relationship building theme. That's really the one where I want things to be fair. And if it means I need to bend or change something in order for it to be fair for someone. So I think that's a beautiful blend of the two.
I think, you talk about that bend word. I think that's also a beautiful one around this consistency, is that bend, don't break.
Right.
Right. It's being consistent. You've got your roots in the ground, but is there a little bit of sway where, it's not that favoritism that we're talking about, but, how can you move a little closer to what an individual needs while keeping it fair? So I think that this particular client really highlighted that facet for me. It was really interesting going into that whole coach conversation, because I saw both of them. I was like, consistency and adaptability, how is this going to work together? And she did a beautiful job
opposite, right?
They feel opposite,
yeah.
right? But she was a wonderful example of how this can play out with a range. So it's setting those guardrails, knowing that there's consistency between those guardrails, but then there are the fine boundaries, defined boundaries. I think the other example that was really interesting recently, and this is maybe an example of consistency. This is early on in my conversation with this gentleman, but he took his consistency kind of to the hot side, the overdoing it side, maybe a little bit, right? But the intention was coming from a great place and from a consistency place, which is that we were talking about a certain type of conversation model, and he found it so interesting and so energizing that he wanted to make sure his department all knew how to do this same sort of conversation. He has 33 people that report to him.
Oh, wow.
So he actually went and did that conversation with all 33 people, but he also had the manager, which are his direct reports, sit in on those conversations. So he was trying to help instill that consistency of treating everybody with the same and doing the conversation the right way. Where I think it went maybe a little overboard was trying to do all 33 of them. I think, and we talked a little bit about this, is do it with the people that are closest to you, your direct reports, and then allow
Mhm.
them through their experience to then carry it on. So
Right.
it was a really interesting application, an example of wanting to do that consistency and treat everybody the same, and talk to the newest person the same way you would the 20-year veteran.
Yeah.
um, but it's also, how far do you want to take that? So
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
think it was
definitely.
I think it was a wonderful effort, and it came from a great place, and the intention was good.
Hmm.
I don't want him to hear this and think that I'm now disparaging him. It was a really great example of this theme, just taken a lot further than I thought it was going to.
Right.
So, but I think that that's something that maybe another listener realizes that, oh, maybe I'm trying to impose everything all the way down the line, and it's coming
Hmm.
from this consistency place. Maybe there's another way I can apply that,
Yeah,
or
take
maybe I fine tune it.
smaller chunks, turn
Yeah,
that dial down a little bit. We don't need to be the person to complete all of it, right? In
right,
order to make sure it's fair.
right.
Uh, yeah, that's so great.
Yeah, you talked about some interesting experiences you've had, or some interesting threads, I guess, in our pre-show about some of the people that you've coached,
Hmm.
and might add yet another layer to this conversation.
Sure.
What do you want to share?
I'd say in general, they were all really good about holding the standards, the procedures, the processes, in like meaning holding people to that standard, or being able to consistently follow these types of things so that the work is fair. So overall, I'd say that was like a normal for everybody that I
Yeah,
that I coached who had consistency. Um, and it always came out about people treating people the same or being
yeah,
fair. And it's like that word just keeps coming out at us, as the fairness.
yeah,
They often would be the ones to bring up concerns or issues about someone that they thought was getting an unfair advantage. So not like in a tattletale way, but hey, this person is doing this and getting this, whereas like this person over here, it might not even involve them at all, but they can see the unfairness and
yeah,
they're bringing that out.
yeah.
This is upsetting to me, and it doesn't even have anything to do with me. And they would say that, like, I don't know why I care. It's not my place, but this is this is what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
um I thought it was a beautiful way to use that consistency, because they were like a voice for others who maybe wouldn't have like put their hand up and went, well, I would like to go. Why does Chad get to go to every process, this new thing that we're going to go to, or this whatever,
Conference, yeah,
yeah, right. they
conference or
they get
professional
passed
development. Yeah,
over and over again, and no one even knew that they wanted to go because they were afraid to speak up. But this the person with consistency, I think I shared with you in the pre-show, I had one client that I just absolutely loved, because she had all relationship building themes. They were all of them in her top 5 were her relationship building, except for consistency. And I thought, because of all of her relationship themes, she was so worried about other people. Um, but when we got to that part, she said, I don't really think I'm this. I don't know what this consistency. I don't know why that came up for me. Like, I don't see that at all. And I'm like, you don't? And then we started talking about some of the things, and like giving me some examples of things that you've worked on at work. And she kept coming back to these, like, this was unfair, or this person had an advantage that another didn't. And it was just so funny to hear her. And then all of a sudden the light bulb came on. Like, she's like, oh, that's what consistency is.
yeah,
It's that struggle still, like we talked about right from the beginning, the consistency versus consistently. um
yes,
and what that looks like, and as far as discipline, like compared to consistency, very different themes. But she once she realized the fairness aspect of it,
yeah,
then she said she couldn't stop seeing it. Everything
right.
she did, like, she was like, oh, that's why I said that, or that's why I did this. So
Yeah,
I think it's really important to notice and maybe call out for this. The motivation with the consistency theme
yeah,
is really about whether it's fair. It's
yeah,
that fair thread.
yeah. I I, I find it so interesting. We keep coming back to that fair, and there's not
Hmm.
really a ton of synonyms. I mean, I'm sure if we worked at it, we could
Right?
probably come up with some, but that sense of fairness. One of the terms that I want to make sure that we get out to our listeners that you came up with in our pre-show, talking
Hmm.
about this sort of noticing other things, is sort of the polite squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
It comes from a good place. You're not trying to put anybody under the gun. You're not trying to be a tattletale, but it's
Right.
that squeaky, like, hey, this is going on. And I just thought maybe if somebody comes across with one phrase to think about, maybe their application of consistency is that sort of polite squeaky wheel.
Hmm.
You're bringing it to the attention of others.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a wonderful layer to add, Jen. Um, Jen, as we often do, we talk about some imagery for
Yeah.
this theme. I have two that I want to talk about, but I didn't know if there was any that you had come
I
across,
I
given
really
that you.
liked I really liked yours, the
Okay,
first one that we talked about during our pre-show yesterday. So if you want to share yours, I
sure.
think they're amazing.
Okay, so that wasn't a self-serving uh, tip toward me. I want to make sure that if something had struck you, since we'd had our pre-show, to invite you in. The two that I came up with share a lot of similarities, but I think the one that you're thinking about is the justice statue, or the
Yes.
figure of justice. And I know we often see that in the courtrooms, or our governmental buildings that are trying to treat people fairly. Most people know that that statue has the two scales. We're all equal in the eyes of the law. I think one facet of that statue that often gets missed by people is that she also carries a sword.
Mm.
And while I'm not looking to chop anybody's head off with consistency talents, I think it's interesting that the scales reflect that equal treatment that we've been talking about, that fairness.
Mhm.
Um, that's front and center. She holds them right out in front. What's sort of not hiding, but is less obvious, is that sword, which is sort of the enforcement side of consistency. People with consistency talents, maybe ones that, like those polite squeaky wheels, are bringing the awareness, are going to call out people, are going to
Yeah.
make sure that, hey, we're not doing favorites here. We're
Mhm.
going to enforce that everybody is being treated um, in generally the same way. I don't want to keep repeating
Yeah.
fair. um,
Yeah.
but it is about that enforcement side of this theme. And so I think that that's something. The other image that I had, for those of you that love my soccer analogies, is this is the referee with the red and yellow cards. So if you violate the rules, sometimes it's simply a free kick, but if it's egregious enough, you might get warned with a yellow card. If it's
Mhm.
really egregious, you obviously are going to be shown the red card and then shown off the field. But the ref is there. Really, it's about the ref, about having that impartial view of both sides, making sure everybody's abiding by the shared expectations on the
Mhm.
field or on the court. So I think that that's another image that people could probably keep in mind, is thinking about that ref on the field or on the
Yeah.
court.
I love that one. And not to say that it means that you are that person, that you're the judge or the
Right,
one
the
that's
sword
like
bearer.
being held responsible to whether or not everything is fair, but we know you feel it. If you have
Yeah,
consistency high, we know you feel it, we know you see it, and that this is a place where you can shine, really bring that out
yeah,
and to others' attention. Because like we talked about, if you're trying to be consistent, or you have the same rule for everyone, but you're not able to see the differences in people, it can kind of work to your disadvantage. And I think I'm kind of going right into that one. Do
yeah.
you do
I,
you
I
want to
was
start with how this can negatively
well,
impact the team?
I'm gonna let you keep rolling because you're
Okay.
you're on it. So I'm gonna let you. We've talked about it in previous episodes about
Yeah.
how these themes can, once we get into team aspects, we've talked about sort of the individual level.
Sure.
Once you start talking about other people, broader organization, how can this theme potentially get in your way? And so
Yeah.
I just want to put that question there so that people know where we're going,
That's good.
but I'm gonna turn it right back to you because you were on a roll. So
Yeah. So along those lines, as a leader, as a manager, if you lack the ability with your consistency, if that causes you to lack the ability to customize based on the needs of your individuals and the team, this can really bring that down and maybe even hurt your ability to build the trust with your team. Like we talked about
yeah,
how this builds trust, but if you're so strict and you're not able to see some of the nuances that need to happen in order
yeah,
to keep, and not everybody works the same. We don't all have the same needs. We don't all have the same talents. So there's that keeping the rules, but like we said earlier, being able to bend to them. So this is one of those places where I feel like it can get in a leader's way.
yeah,
As a teammate, we talked about that, like they might be maybe unwilling to try the new way, and I think we talked about this one before. Like I said that, like, we're just going to do it this way just because, like, I decided, like, I want to do something, I don't want to do it this way anymore, we're going to change how we're doing things, and it's this just because reason. They Teammates, your teammates with consistency can be a little more difficult during times of change
yeah.
if there aren't some of those like expectations and things set up right from the beginning.
Yeah, I would echo both those comments. I'm going to add just a couple things to the well, both sides, but start with the back with the leader.
Yeah.
Um, I think you were getting at this thing, but I just want to make sure I touch on it. Is that you're seeing the group as a singular
Yes.
entity versus seeing each individual as
Hmm.
sort of that forest for the trees.
Yes.
Figuring that out. Are you just looking at the whole forest, or are you looking at each individual tree and what each individual tree needs? I go
Hmm.
back to what I was talking about, how it negatively impacted me with treating my sons. Same thing applies
Right.
here. If you're a leader looking at your team and you're not reflecting those unique individual talents.
Right.
um, I The other part that I was just going to touch on is, if you were a leader holding super consistent expectations, that
Mm-hmm.
those that might be getting so, say you've set certain metrics and you've set the expectation that this is what we consider success,
Hmm.
and an individual gets within a hair's width of that success but doesn't actually cross that threshold. If you're a leader that's holding super consistent, you're leaning almost too hard on those talent themes, and you're not recognizing people for the extraordinary effort they've already made just because they haven't crossed the success threshold,
Hmm.
I think you could be doing your disservice. It takes away from your opportunity to recognize people. And again, that's that bending versus being so set in your
Hmm.
ways. So I think that's one part. And then
and
also,
and I, before you move off of that one,
yeah,
I think you said it beautifully in our pre-show too, about the fact that we're not asking you, to just give a medal to everybody on the
no,
on the team just
no,
because, they almost got there.
right,
It's that recognition for how much effort and how far they got, even if they
yeah,
didn't make the actual goal line. They didn't finish in time, or they didn't, perform exactly to this set threshold that was there. They didn't pass that finish line like you were saying, but they were almost there. So being able to still show the recognition, I think, yeah, I really
yeah,
liked the way you said that yesterday too.
yeah. Well, I'm sorry I couldn't phrase it exactly the same way
I
today,
know.
but you did a wonderful job summarizing me. I'm going to stay on the recognition thread for just a second, which
Yeah.
is, if you have consistency talents and you are recognizing each person the exact same way, you are running the risk of ostracizing some people.
Yep.
Some people really like that public recognition, and others are going to want it in private, or maybe with a smaller group, or maybe it's just them and their families. Um,
Mhm.
so I think, again, that goes back to that forest and trees dichotomy of, looking at who people are as individuals. But I think, especially in this day and age where recognition and how you maintain employee engagement is really key, um, that understanding of what people need and what people are going to respond to is going to be really key. And so if you stand too hard and fast on your consistency talents, you could be damaging that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the individual contributor side, I'm just going to throw out the term that you kind of struck on it. I'm going to throw it out there. This is the way we've always done it.
Yes.
That's the phrase that I had running through my head as you were talking. So I'm not going to beat on it too much, but I think that if you're thinking in that way, particularly as an individual contributor, you're getting around to Jen's points of, are you sort of standing in the way of change? Are you standing in the way of, well, this change needs to happen, but that's going to throw off our cultural and behavioral norms within our team. So I'm not going to engage with the whole process. That is causing a negative impact on the team. So I think that that's just another phrase. If you've got that phrase running through your head of, well, this is where I'm going to stand and I'm going to stay, this is the hill I'm going to die on. It's probably coming from these themes, these talents, but it's also something that you need to be aware of changing. So we're going to end on a positive note. We're going to bring this back around to positive contributions, best contributions.
Yes.
Jen, when you think about leaders who have this set of talents, what are some of their best contributions?
The one that I really liked in the leaders that I've coached, and then the way I've seen them grow with their consistency themes, is that they really get a good understanding of the procedures that need to be in place to provide the best processes and the ultimate success for the team. And I think the leader is able to find really simple rules to follow that make for the good of the group, as opposed to really trying to individualize everything. That this consistency talent helps them do that, where they are able to, like you were talking about with your client, where we're able to have the big rules that work for everybody, and it really brings for the good of the group. I think their ability to be fair and practical, really level that playing field, will build stability with their team. So it's those two things that, always thinking for the good of the group, the fairness, and then really building the stability with their team.
I would echo that and just add that I think they're great people to sort of set the cultural expectations, the behavioral norms for how people treat each other, how they're going to engage with each other, the cadences around that, but also just how those interactions should go. So I think that was going to be the only thing that I was going to add to what you just said, because I think you covered all the bases I was going to contribute. So we're going to leave that one there. Did you have any thoughts on individual contributors that have these talents and their best contribution, if they're maybe not in that leadership role, but they're trying to bring their best to their colleagues and to the team as a whole?
Yeah, it's kind of that flip side of that, this is the way we've always done it. If you're on the team and you see someone wanting to change the processes, or it's time to change a process, or we're going to do this a new way, getting on board early. If you're a leader and you want to bring that teammate, that consistency teammate on board early, they can help find some of these things that might be a problem in the future. They can search out what might not be fair. Again, there's that word, what's not really going to work for everyone. Where are we going to have some of the issues and the problems with the imbalance? And I think they're able to really dive into that. You're getting them on board early too, then, so you can feel good about being part of the process of solving this, instead of sitting back and going, I don't know where we're going with this. I'm not dying, this is the hill I'm going to die on, like you said. They're able to, if you can get them up in front, and you as a team member can put yourself in the position to join some of these change conversations early, then you can actually help make sure and ensure that things are going to be fair and that we're working straight through.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind as you say that is we've touched on the wonderful first follower. I think we talked about that a little bit on activator. These are people that can help. They could be great first followers, because they are then going to set the new behavioral norms, the new behavioral expectations, the new metrics, even if it gets down to, sort of the number side. If you're somebody with analytical like myself,
Yeah.
you're looking at not only the relationships but also the metrics. And so having them on early, I think your point is very well made. Of you get them out of the, well, this is the way we've always done it, but you also then get them into a mindset where they can then explain and start to set out the new expectations and the new ways that they're going to engage with each other. So I think that's wonderful. The only thing that I'll add is that these are great people to have on the team to help hold leaders accountable
Yes.
to that fairness, that polite squeaky wheel that we were just talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
These are people that are going to hold those leaders, even if they're not in a positionally a positional position of power. They bring such a wonderful sense of power because they are speaking on others' behalf.
Sure.
And then they're also going to call out a leader, say, hey, you treated this person differently than this person. What are we going to do about that? And then you've at least put the ball on the court for people to talk about, and how are we going to change that, or how are we going to rectify it? So I think that's just another great benefit and contribution for this, for people that have these talents to bring to their teams and to politely challenge their leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think that's great.
yeah. So Jen, as we wrap up here, are there any big points that you want to maybe summarize, or if we were to, I don't know, snip this out and share with people, the summary, what would you want to reinforce?
I think my two main takeaways for those with consistency talents is that realizing you can be the voice for others, call
Yeah.
out those in fairness, be that polite squeaky wheel to call out where things maybe aren't equal, aren't level, that they need to be adjusted, because that is good for everyone then,
Yeah.
no one's left behind. And to really understand the motivation here isn't to be the squeaky whale, isn't to be the tattletale, isn't about this versus that. It's in fairness. It's always about the fairness. It comes down to this. We can't do it right. We can't get this done if it's not fair.
Yeah. I would definitely echo those. The one, and I'm thinking if I've got a second one, but the one I definitely would put out there is the bend not break. So or the guardrails. So it doesn't have to be so narrow, that the expectations are so narrow that there's only one way to do it. That there's maybe a broader set, instead of a rural road, you've got an interstate's worth to work on. But the consistency is that this is the range in which you can behave, and we expect each other to engage as a team, as an organization. So I think there's that part that maybe I'm being tickled a little bit by my past client with the adaptability on that one, that you're going to have policies and practices and guidelines for how to engage with people, but you need to individualize. And maybe that's my second point, is that remember, in all of this, consistency is great. You're helping people understand what the expectations are, but understand that you've got unique individuals on your team, and you're engaging with unique individuals, and you need to work around that. You need to figure out what is the right application for those consistency talents on people.
Yeah, like we were talking about those dials, right? Sometimes we can run a little hot, but we don't want to go the other way where we're running way cold either. So it's finding that good balance of being able to use that consistency theme, but not hold everyone to such strict standards that we can't get anything done. I think it's great.
So good. Well,
awesome.
I'm going to again encourage anybody who's listened this far to hopefully subscribe to our channels. Keep coming back. We've got more episodes planned for 2023 now that we're here. We're going to be continuing to cover the Clifton Strengths themes. Jen and I have already started talking about some other themes, other topics outside of Clifton Strengths that we're going to talk about. So please subscribe. Please keep coming back. If you have thoughts or recommendations or ways that your consistency talents have come out, make sure to leave either comments or write a review. Those always help us understand how we can get better. But with that, I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting.
And I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And we'll see you on the next episode.